Okay, so we finally got to the business cycle. So you are going to be able to identify the characteristics of the business cycle. So we have 5 focus questions. First, what is the business cycle? How do economists forecast business cycles? What are some economic indicators? What causes business cycles? And then how does politics cause upward and downward movements in the economy? Our key terms are business cycle and recession. And then what is a business cycle? So what it is it's a recurrent swing, meaning it goes up and it goes down in real GDP of an economy. And economists usually talk about 5 phases of a business cycle. Now, if you're a Marxist or you read Marxist work, this is the problem with capitalism, which is that it goes up, right? It will peak and then it will crash, it contracts, and this creates instability, and this is a bad thing. I mean, that's not true, or I mean, I'm sorry, that's not false, but we have come up with things like the Federal Reserve to try to help ameliorate these problems, but it's not untrue that there are business cycles or instability in capitalism. So business cycles can be caused by several types of events. First is a change in the money supply. This is controlled by the Federal Reserve, so that's the government's involvement. Second is it could be changes in business investment, residential construction, and government spending. Okay. Next is politics, Democrats versus Republicans, left versus right, things like that. Innovation, this would be technological change, and then dramatic changes to supply. So to calculate real GDP, we take the quantity of goods and services that are produced in a country in a current year and then multiply it by the prices that exist in a base year. We've already done this. You should already know how to do this, okay? So this should not be hard to understand. Real GDP, okay? Base year, price, times the quantity. So these are the different parts of the business cycle. So the peak it's the top of the business cycle. This is when real GDP is at a temporary high. The key word here is temporary. Then we have a peak is followed by a contraction. So if real GDP decreases, the economy is said to be in what's called contraction. In a recession, which is something I really want you to pay attention to because you are definitely going to be hearing these words because of the economy right now. A recession occurs when real GDP falls for 2 consecutive quarters. So that would be a total of 6 months. Usually when the economy contracts, the unemployment rate raises. So if you think about the unemployment rate right now, when you and I were meeting together, the unemployment was at an all-time low of 3.4%. It is at 14% right now. Okay. Then we have what's called the trough. This is the low point in the real GDP. So this is just before GDP turns up. It's called the trough. This is bottoming out, right? Then we have the recovery, and this is the period when the real GDP is rising. It's increasing. So recovery is a good place to be. Then you have expansion, and the expansion refers to an increase in GDP that's beyond the recovery. Usually the recovery is at least for 1 quarter, so 3 months. So if you have 6 months of recovery, it's known as an expansion. Okay? So these are the 5 things: peak, contraction, trough, recovery, expansion. You can see it right here: peak, contraction, trough, recovery, expansion. And it's a cycle. How do you forecast this? Well, if you were to compare the economy to your health, in the first stage, you physically start to feel a little sluggish and tired. What we call these in economics are leading indicators. And what they do is they let you know that something is wrong in the economy. And leading economic indicators, they precede economic upturns or downturns. Remember that CPI that we talked about, the Consumer Price Index, or just price indexes? These are indicators, okay? So when you're ill, you might not have a bad headache, or you might have a bad headache, and you might have like a stuffed up nose. And these are what are called coincident indicators, or like in economics, that's what they would be called. And these are showing that these are indicators that coincide with illness. So for example, if the economy is not doing well, then you should also see rise in unemployment. Okay, so unemployment would be a coincident indicator. Rise in prices, also a coincident indicator. So in an economy, coincident indicators will accompany economic upturns and downturns. When you are recovering from an illness, you may continue to experience a slight headache or runny nose, and these are called lagging indicators. And you've all experienced this. It's like, yesterday you were feeling awful. Maybe you were bedridden. Today, you're able to watch TV. You can get up and get a drink of water. You're feeling better than you were, but you're still not 100%. Okay, so lagging indicators are things that, even though the economy, for economics purposes, even though the economy is definitely better, not all parts of the economy are better. So maybe prices have gone up or down, but unemployment has not changed at the same rate. So that's still lagging. So what causes the business cycle? So between 1945 and 2009, the United States has gone through 11 business cycles. And what causes these business cycles? Well, there's 5 causes. There's the money supply, there's business investment, residential construction, government spending, politics, innovation, and supply shocks. And I mentioned those in the first or second slide of the actual information, and I'm mentioning it again because these things are important to understand. You can't avoid business cycles. If you were to actually look at the United States economic system prior to 1945, the business cycles actually happened in much faster succession. So things have slowed down because of like the Federal Reserve, things like that. So the money supply, some economists say that ups and downs in the business cycle are actually caused by the erratic behavior of the monetary authorities at the Fed. Because remember, the Federal Reserve Board sets policy for like the banks, but the OMC, they meet at least 8 times per year, and they make decisions about what's going to happen with the money supply. Remember, if they sell bonds, right? That means money comes in. That means they shrink the money supply. If they buy bonds, they buy bonds. They're increasing the money supply because they're giving money back out to buy those things. So, the Federal Reserve is an entity which looks at things like the Consumer Price Index, and they make decisions. Hopefully, the people who are making the decisions are making them based on facts. And if you look at the Federal Reserve's total record, right, it did screw up in the Great Depression. And how can I say that? Because if you look at the Great Depression, this is Black Tuesday. This is when the stock market crashes. They reduced the money supply. That was the wrong thing to do. That was at the exact same time that there was a run on the banks. They should have increased the money supply. But they've learned from that. And in 2007, when we had what's called the Great Recession, they pumped money into the economy, and they kept the United States from going into the depression. Okay, so money supply is definitely part of it. Second is business investment. Remember, that's businesses like buying things. Residential construction is like the building of homes, and then government spending is the government buying things. Remember, it's not transfer of payments. It's the government buying things like defense, or education, infrastructure. So if there's a reduction in businesses, like if businesses aren't hiring new people or building new factories, that could change the business cycle. We could go from expansion to peak, and then from peak to contraction. So any of those things, if these things decrease or increase. You can also do this though. This is Keynesianism, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but not today, but I'm talking about in a later unit. But if business investment and residential construction go down, the government can actually offset that by increasing government spending. The thing of it is if government spending goes up, taxes have to go up too. So there is a negative to this. Then next is politics. So some business cycles, they can be caused by politicians pushing legislation through Congress in the hopes of gaining re-election. So they might do things like tax increases or tax cuts or increased government spending, and then these can lead to changes in the business cycle. Now, you guys already know this because you had civics, but like every 2 years, the entire 100%, all 435 members of the House are up for election or re-election, and then a third of the Senate is up, and then every 4 years we have a presidential election. So these people have agendas and things that they want to see happen, and policy changes that they put into place or people that they pick for running the institutions like the Federal Reserve and other parts of our government, it has an impact on the economy as well. And then innovations. So major innovations, they can really upset the business cycle, okay? Because firms make investments, and usually that's a good thing, but this could also mean that when they invest in these new things, they might be letting the old people go. So a way to look at this is like at the turn of the last century, automobiles took over, right? Well, people used to get around on horses. So that meant that you didn't need horses anymore. That means you don't need stables to house these animals anymore. You don't need blacksmiths to shoot them anymore. So, the business cycle on the side of like the horse side of things, it all went away. I mean, just almost, I wouldn't say overnight, but within a matter of a decade, it just disappeared. And then boom. But in its place, though, you need mechanics, you need gasoline pump operators. So it's not, it's called creative destruction is what it is, but innovation causes those. Okay. Then we have supply shocks. So business cycles can be affected if there's some sort of dramatic change on the supply side. And these disruptions can be natural or unnatural. So it can be from a hurricane or it can be from a war. And they're usually temporary. I mean, I don't mean they're always temporary. And firms, they end up producing less because maybe there's some sort of shock to their system. So for example, in a hurricane, it could damage a port. And that could mean that the intermediate goods that the company needs to make a finished product, it can't reach them. But once the docks have been repaired, those goods will come back in, and then the process will start up again. So real GDP, it does go down, and the unemployment rate does go up. So if you are bored and you want to look at the numbers, if you look at what the real GDP of the United States is right now, right, and then you would be able to see this is why we've gone from a 3% unemployment rate to a 4% unemployment rate, because real GDP has been affected by this. And remember, you're going to take the base year, and that's up to you what year you pick, but you take those prices and times that by quantity. Okay. Now prices probably haven't changed for 2020, but the quantity has gone way down because of the current situation that we have. So toilet paper. Just think in the future when people look at this, they'll have no idea what I'm talking about, but you guys, you'll know. And then here's a presentation, a video about recession, hyperinflation, and stagflation. It's really worth watching because if you don't understand the economic side of social science, you don't really get a clear view of history or politics, honestly. They're all interdependent. They're all woven together. And that, I think, is everything. Yep, that's it. All right. Thanks, guys.